The year was 1920, and America was in a crisis. Soldiers had returned home from World War I to find that their jobs were gone. Unemployment doubled to nearly 12%. Stock market was on its way to losing half of its value. The gross national product was in free fall. Outgoing President Woodrow Wilson's decision to involve America in World War I and his dyed-in-the-wool progressive agenda left the country reeling. Wilson had used the war effort to grossly expand an already bloated federal government, and in an effort to redistribute the wealth, he raised the top income tax to 77%. The end result was a country deeply in debt with an economy that was on the verge of total collapse. This was the Depression you probably never heard of, wiped clean from our history books. Why? It's called the Forgotten Depression. More on that in a minute. Another key factor in this economic nightmare was the action taken by the Federal Reserve, another Wilson-era progressive idea. As times got tougher during Wilson's last term, the Fed began to print money and make it easier to get credit. Even as America's 29th president, Warren G. Harding, took an oath of office in 1921, the country was on the brink. He wasted no time. His plan was astonishingly simple. No bailouts, no stimulus package. In fact, just the opposite.
Between 1920 and 22, the federal budget was in fact cut roughly in half. They cut top marginal income tax rates and marginal income tax rates for all groups substantially throughout the 20s. After they cut marginal tax rates so substantially, they were also able to cut the national debt, not the deficit, the national debt, by 1/3 during the 1920s.
The budget was cut in half. Tax rates reduced in all income brackets. The national debt reduced by 1/3. In 18 months, America rebounded. The result? The Roaring '20s.
It was during the 1920s that millions of Americans bought their first radio, millions of Americans bought their first refrigerator, their first car. The number of Americans who had telephone doubled.
President Harding died of a heart attack 2 years into his presidency, but his successor, Calvin Coolidge, continued what he had started.
I want the people of America to be able to work less for the government and more for themselves. I want them to have the rewards of their own industry. This is the chief meaning of freedom.
Limited government and free enterprise fueled one of the greatest success stories in American history. Again, you probably never heard of this.
We never hear a thing about the Depression of 1920 for obvious reasons, because we might draw the wrong conclusions. We might conclude that maybe these policies could be implemented today. We're not allowed to draw that conclusion, so this episode is simply left off the table.
What the history books can't deny is just 9 years later, in spite of all the country had been through, progressive presidents Herbert Hoover, FDR, following Woodrow Wilson's progressive playbook of bloated government, massive spending, and sky-high taxes, led us back to the brink, the Great Depression. And by the way, in another undeniable example of progressive revisionist history, you, me, our kids have all been taught that FDR's New Deal proved to be the salvation of America. Nothing could be further from the truth. The New Deal expanded government to levels approaching a dictatorship. Taxes reached obscene levels, and the era of government entitlements, many of which are still choking our economy today, was born. The New Deal prolonged the Great Depression in America. As other countries around the world rebounded years earlier, America suffered through a full decade of hardship. And yet, surprisingly, unexplainably, it's that very solution that serves as the model for our leaders today as America once again suffers through a crisis brought on by progressive leadership. The Forgotten Depression, forgotten no more. To know where you are, you've got to know your history, where we've been. we'll be able to see the future. Get the history you never learned. We have produced a couple of documentaries on this for my website at glennbeck.com. The full story on the Forgotten Depression and much, much more in documentary form, Insider Extreme, available only to glennbeck.com subscribers. Check out our mini documentaries on the progressives, The Forgotten Depression and Doomed to Repeat. It will truly blow your mind. Check it out now. Right back in a minute. Hello, America. This week we have a special series for 5 days. Everybody always says, oh, just tell me the truth. Okay, we'll tell you the truth. Now, the question is, once you have the truth, what will you do with it? Will you make the tough decisions? America is a patient, and the patient has cancer. When cancer is diagnosed, the doctor doesn't prescribe an aspirin and 24 hours of bed rest. If the patient got cancer from smoking, the doctor certainly doesn't try to cure cancer with more cigarettes. Nothing small is going to fix this. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. Our country is being transformed, but into what? What are we changing into? This week, I'm going to show you the path to restoration, but it will be a path that is drastic. We are all going to feel the pain of treatment, but if we do what we did in 1920, it won't last long. It'll hurt, but it won't last long, and it will save the patient. The number one question or criticism we get is, oh, you're just the party and no, you don't agree with Barack Obama. It amazes me. Has anybody noticed that George Bush said when we were hit by people who flew planes into buildings, you're either with them or you're with us. And everybody went crazy in the liberal world. Has anybody noticed that that's what this president says to Americans who aren't flying planes into buildings? That you're either with us or you're with the Tea Partiers. What? Well, we contacted the Cato Institute, and with their help, and also with several other people that will be joining me this week from Freakonomics, Stephen Dubner, I'm going to show you how to slash the budget, unlike any politician will ever tell you. We'll even feature a marketing expert later in the week to help us learn how to sell the message to the American people. Plus, Ben Sherwood will be here later this week to help us learn how to weather the storm should we decide to do this. What should you prepare for if we do it or if we don't? Remember, this is only one idea to soften the ground. America has to talk about dramatic moves. I talked to this guy today on my radio program, Paul Ryan. He's a congressman from the land of progressives. He's got a plan out, too. I have to tell you, he calls it the roadmap for America's future. I don't know how I never met this guy. I don't know how we never been on each other's radar. He sounds to me like he gets it. Take a look at his website. Hell, you have an idea? Great. Let's talk about it. But can we please start to have this discussion? Now, before the Reagan tax cuts, the economy was choking on high inflation, high interest rates, and high employment. Then along came a doctor, Dr. Art Laffer, and the Laffer curve. It sounds like something that you would see at a comedy club, like Milk Through Your Nose, but it's not. The Laffer curve sets an optimal income tax level to maximize the tax revenue, and that's why I said earlier that, hi, Dr. Al.
How are you? Good to see you, Glenn.
Show me the Laffer curve here. I said earlier, we're not talking about raising taxes, we're talking about tax revenues. Right?
Exactly. No, that's exactly right.
We don't need to raise taxes. We need to raise tax revenue. We need to get more dollars in.
That's right.
Explain this.
Well, you know what this is these are tax rates here. Tax rates on this level. All right? And this is tax revenues down here. Tax revenues. And the thing is fairly simple. If I taxed you to 120% of everything you earned, so every time you came into the studio, instead of getting a check, you got a bill. How much would you work?
I would work it all.
Obviously, it's zero if you get nothing. You have zero output at 100% tax rates, and you therefore have zero revenue. Obviously, at a zero tax rate, you'll have lots of output, but there'll be no taxes, so you'll have zero revenues. And as you start raising the tax rate, you can see that revenues start rising, because even though there's a little bit less output, you'll still be taxing at more rates. And likewise, if you start lowering tax rates here, people will start coming back to work, and there will be revenues. And this maps out the relationship between tax rates and tax revenues. And this whole range here, which we call the prohibitive range, here, if you raise tax rates, you actually get less money. And in my view, in a number of the taxes that we face in the U.S., we are literally
We're
in this
talking today, there's a study out, 77% income tax. That's what they're talking about.
Yeah, well, that would clearly be in this range. I mean, and especially on upper income people, the more you raise their tax rates, they move abroad, they shift the types of income they get, they go out of business, they defer the income, they do all sorts of stuff, and you just aren't going to get their money.